Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the How to Die podcast. So, today we're going to continue the discussion from the last episode about convention. And I want to lay out this philosophy that I have in terms of following or not following convention. I'm really curious what listeners think about this philosophy. I may have missed a few scenarios, but this is kind of how I see things. So if you think of your life in all these different areas of life, career, finance, relationships, health, there's probably a dozen different categories and subcategories. And for each of those areas of your life, sometimes what you want just happens to align with what society values. And sometimes it doesn't. And so I think that it can play out in four different ways. There's these four categories ways that it can play out. So let me explain. So the first scenario is what I call the win-win situation because it's the best case scenario in that when you want something and society values it. So for example, let's say you live in a culture where it's really valued to have children and you personally want to have children. That's beautiful. There's no problem. In fact, you have your children, you reap the benefits of not of following convention and being valued in that way. It's a beautiful thing. And whenever there's a part of your life that aligns like that, celebrate it because those are areas where you're going to feel like you fit in. And that feels good. There's a reason why we crave that kind of status, and it's not a bad thing. Then the second way that it can play out is that there's something that's valued. There's something that your society values or your culture values, and you don't want that. If you're honest with yourself, you don't really want that. And you decide not to follow convention. So, for example, let's say that you decide not to have kids in a culture where it's really valued to have kids. Now, in this situation, this is the second category. I think of a situation where you don't follow convention, but you're totally cool with it. Like you don't suffer around it. It's just for whatever reason, and it's hard to know why it plays out this way, but sometimes it doesn't bother you that you don't follow convention. It's not that hard. Maybe you know other people who also aren't following convention, so you kind of have a tribe of people that you interact with that makes you feel okay about the situation. Maybe you, for whatever reason, just feel so strongly about it that you just have no doubt and it's not a problem. This is also not a bad situation because you're following your heart, you're following what you really want to do. You don't get the social status, right? Maybe your parents give you a hard time, maybe people in your community give you a hard time, but for the most part you're happy. So that's a good situation. It's not as great as the first category, but it's not horrible. Now, the third category, as you can imagine, is a situation very similar, except that you don't follow convention and you suffer around it. It is something that you're sensitive about. Maybe it took you a while to make a decision. Maybe you were on the fence. Maybe you're still on the fence. And so you're sensitive about it. And when you talk to people, it's a sore subject. Um, for example, let's keep the example of having kids or not. Maybe you're on the fence and maybe you're getting older and you need to make a decision and you're feeling good so far about the decision, but maybe there's just some suffering around it. Um, that's a difficult spot to be in because you're going to get pressure to follow the formula, to follow what everyone else is doing, but you're not going to want to do that, or you're going to want to think for yourself and figure it out and have room to be honest with yourself. So that's a very challenging situation. Um, Now, it's not as bad as the last situation, the fourth category. And this is where you follow convention, but you don't want to. You don't want to follow convention, but you feel pressure. You hear these stories. You hear these stories of people who get married, to their college sweetheart because they feel like they need to get married and they feel pressure and they're like, well, I better do it. If not now, when? And I should just go do it. And everyone's doing it and it's the adult thing to do. Or I should go buy a home even though I don't really want to buy a home. Or I should take this job even though I don't want this job. And this is the worst case scenario because, as I said before, now more than ever, you can't just follow convention. You have to do what you really love. And if you have an area of your life that falls into this trap where you're going with the flow, hoping to get the status that it will bring, but you're really miserable because the reality of the situation is you don't really want what that has to offer, there's just going to be a lot of suffering around that. And a lot of people wake up later. They get a divorce, they find themselves in a bad financial situation, whatever. These are where there can be a crisis in your life where you have to face up to the fact that this wasn't what you really wanted. So anyways, I like to look at my life in these different ways and look at the different areas of my life and ask, am I following what I really want to follow? Am I suffering around this because I'm not following what everyone else is doing? Is that really a problem, or is it just I'm struggling with having to deal with other people? And where are there win-win situations in my life where I can really celebrate that I match up with with convention because that feels good and that's not such a bad thing. So anyways, those that's my way of thinking of how it can play out. And I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know.